Let's firstly start off with why they chose to upgrade the outlook for Angola.
I think it's a number of fundamentals. Across the board, there's probably 15 to 20 very positive aspects which you're seeing: sustainable growth, dropping inflation. They're doing well on oil revenues. They're starting to diversify the economy. So there's a lot of positives there, and one or two negatives, which I think is holding them back from a full rating upgrade. But certainly a move from stable to positive is quite rare in these times.
But the ratings agencies agree on the BB minus, but Fitch appears to be on its own from the positive to stable because S&P and Moody's still maintain the stable part. What do you think of this?
Could be a timing issue. You know, often you see one agency lead and then the others follow shortly thereafter. Although we have elections coming up very shortly, end of August. If I was at a rating agency now, I'd just wait a couple of months.
And these will be significant elections for Angola. This is not just an election that you have in a normal democracy.
Yes, and I think you could also see the phased-in change in leadership following these elections.
So do you think that we're going to have a change in government?
I don't think immediately at the elections, but I think the current president is looking to phase in new leadership.
Okay. Sorry, Larry, let me just, before we go there,
ahead,
we
yes.
picked up on the other ratings agencies. But overall, what needs to be done to convince agencies that the country deserves a rating upgrade?
I think the fundamentals or the positives are there. They need to continue. You know, you don't want to see any massive shocks on the oil side. You want to diversify the economy and continue to do that, and also see good growth in those other sectors. So at the moment, your non-oil sector is growing quicker than the oil sector, which is a positive. But you still have basic governance and transparency issues, which it's one issue along with all these positives, but it's a major issue. So I would think that you're probably looking at about 18 months before you look at a full upgrade to say double B.
How is the oil sector performing vis-a-vis, say, the non-oil sector in Angola? Angola is Africa's second largest oil producer. They're
both performing well. I would just say that the non-oil sector is performing slightly better, although oil is so material to the Angolan economy. You know, it's over 90% of forex, government revenues is a big chunk, and over 50% of GDP. So it's a massive factor, but they're both performing well, to be honest. And the government is now legislating to make sure that those oil dollars go through Angolan banks and give them the much-needed boost. Is that well advised? Yes, I think it's a good idea, and the fact that it's being phased in is also wise. So you need to give banks an opportunity to adapt to this, and also to have the effects of it. So it's starting off with government taxes coming through the system. I think the next big move would be where you start to have local service providers' funds flowing into Angola in the currency. But that will also have consequences, because now you have more deposits. People are going to have more local currency, and what are they going to do with that? They're going to deposit it with banks, and the banks have to know what to do with this money. And you don't want pressure on the banks to lend this money out irresponsibly. So phased is good.
Give us an idea of the state of the current financial system in Angola right now, and is it dominated by a few banks, or do we have a lot of smaller banks and larger banks, just versus the likes of South Africa? How does it compare?
Quite different to SA. So you have lots of banks. I mean, there's well in excess of 20 banks in Angola. Although you do have your large first-tier banks, so you've got your BAI, your BPC, your Espirito Santos, BIC, etc. So you have your large banks there, and then you have this mid-tier section, and then you have your small banks. And I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some changes in the regulatory environment. There's talk of increasing capital requirements, etc. And you may see some consolidation then following that.
Touching on transparency, Angola is ranked 168th out of 183 countries in Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. This is a problem many African countries share. And does this sort of affect their reputation being seen as a proper place to do business?
Certainly. I think that's quite a problem. But changes that we're seeing, for example, this Forex Act that we're speaking of now, their budgetary process, the central bank has certainly progressed very positively in improving regulation. So they're on the right track, and like I say, it's probably not short term but medium term that we will see the right results.
And a positive spilling over from this, but in the short term, what if you have a case, but because you do have ranking 168 out of 183, that's pretty much at the bottom of that list. What if you do have, as a result of this, revealing unscrupulous activities in the financial sector, overall in government, as a result of the heightened transparency that's needed because of this new law?
Yes, it's obviously a risk and a consequence, and that's perhaps why you see across the globe, particularly in emerging markets, that it happens quite slowly.
But still, companies, many of them multinationals, do businesses, many of these African countries, Angola included, despite some perceptions of corruption, and sometimes the countries might say it is bigger than the perception, it is smaller than people actually would want you to believe.
Yes, and I think what you need to factor in is the country rating. So while they come very near the bottom on that, I think it's counted slightly by the country rating, and then corporates decide on what type of business they want to do in the country. You don't necessarily come in and start with the highest risk business. You might start with a slightly lower risk business in that country and then develop it as you grow your knowledge of the country.
So it's certainly the type of business that you're doing in the country that also needs to be factored in. But in the meantime, thanks for delving into that with us. That was Gregory Havermahl, Head of Structured Trade and Commodities Finance from Rand Merchant Bank.